Forget what the documentaries told you. The Siege of Leningrad wasn't a neat story of standard-issue weapons and clean supply lines. It was frozen hands on cold steel. It was ammunition counted by the handful. It was paperwork that said, "Issued," while the person on the street carried whatever could be found, traded, or built. Sidearms became tools of status, tools of fear, and sometimes just a last argument at arm's length. These are the 7 forgotten handguns of the Leningrad Siege. Number 7. Ersatz factory pistols. Makeshift solutions that sometimes failed at the worst moment. Soviet regulations wanted sidearms to be standardized, inspectable, and supported by predictable ammunition. In 1941–42, Leningrad couldn't promise any of that. Factories were damaged, power was unreliable, and skilled labor was pulled in every direction. Yet local defense units still needed pistols for guards, couriers, and plant security. So some workshops did the obvious thing. They made pistols anyway. Crude, ersatz handguns appeared, simplified blowback designs, rough machining, minimal safeties, and whatever caliber could be fed from local stockpiles. Pieces were welded where they should have been pinned. Springs were improvised. Magazines varied from gun to gun. Worker detachments and rear area personnel sometimes ended up with them because there simply weren't enough TT-33s or serviceable nagants to go around. When an ersatz pistol worked, it solved a real problem. One guard could control a gate or a stairwell without tying up a rifleman. When it didn't, it jammed hard, often on feed or extraction and in close quarters, that could turn a sidearm into dead weight. Some users quietly swapped them away the first chance they got. Number 6. Captured German Luger P08 pistols. A precision trophy that depended on one fragile supply chain. Officially, Red Army sidearms were supposed to be Soviet models with Soviet ammunition. The TT-33 in 7.62x25, or the Nagant M1895 in 7.62x38R. Captured weapons were to be turned in, logged, and redistributed through channels that could actually supply them. A frontline soldier in Leningrad rarely lived in that tidy system. On the Leningrad front, including formations such as the 42nd Army, captured P08 Lugers circulated hand-to-hand. They were compact, accurate, and they looked like a real officer's pistol in a war where appearances could affect authority. But the Lugers' value came with a quiet math problem: 9x19mm ammunition. If you couldn't feed it, you were carrying a well-made paperweight. In some documented fighting, a reliable captured pistol could matter in a sudden scramble, like a short-range counterattack where the first usable shots decide who owns a trench corner. But the same pistol could force ugly choices later. When 9mm ran low, men sometimes bartered the gun, discarded it, or carried it unloaded as a badge. The weapon didn't fail them. Logistics did. Number 5. Black market revolvers. Desperation deals where the currency was hunger, not rubles. The state preferred control. Weapons were supposed to move through depots, unit armorers, and signed receipts. In besieged Leningrad, normal currency collapsed, and so did the idea that every pistol had a clean paper trail. That gap created a marketplace the authorities tried to suppress. Older revolvers, often pre-revolutionary or early Soviet patterns, circulated in trades that looked less like crime and more like survival. A revolver could buy bread. It could buy protection. It could buy access to a warm room for a night. For improvised militias and civilian guards, a 5 or 7 shot wheelgun also meant you didn't need magazines, and it tolerated neglect better than many automatics. But black market guns carried 2 risks at once. First, the mechanical risk: worn timing, weak springs, questionable ammunition. Second, the human risk: possession could bring arrest if discovered, especially with internal security looking for speculation and theft. A revolver might keep you alive at a checkpoint. It might also be the reason you never come home from the next one. If you were trapped in that city, would you trade food for a revolver you couldn't verify or trust your luck without it? Number 4. Hastily issued training pistols. Tools meant for practice, forced into real fights. In theory, training weapons stayed in training. Live-fire pistols and revolvers were supposed to be inspected, maintained, and issued with enough ammunition to keep skills current. In the siege, the need to arm rear guards and emergency detachments pushed weapons out of closets and into holsters, ready or not. Units tasked with holding ground behind the main line elements associated with formations like the 55th Army in the Leningrad sector sometimes received whatever was available. Older Nagant M1895 revolvers that had lived hard lives as instructional guns. Some had seen years of indifferent maintenance. Bluing worn off. Cylinders rough. Double action pulls heavy enough to throw shots low under stress. In a static defense role, they could still do a job. A sentry with a revolver didn't need a fresh magazine to make a point at 10 paces, and the Nagant's sealed cylinder design could be surprisingly tolerant of grime. But when real contact happened, raids, sudden infiltration, fights and stairwells, the limitations showed. Poor sights, slow reloads, and worn parts turned, issued, into barely serviceable. Reports and requests for resupply in 1942 weren't complaining. They were arithmetic. The wrong pistol cost time, and time cost people. Before we move on, look at what's already happened in this list. Some guns were built too fast, some were captured trophies, and some were traded like food. Which would you carry if you had to keep it running for a month? Tell us below, and subscribe for the top 3. Number 3. Improvised handguns. When the city ran out of pistols, it started making substitutes. On paper, a handgun had to be a known model with known parts, test firing, and an armorer who could sign his name to it. Ammunition had to be a standard caliber, issued in lots that could be tracked. Leningrad in 1941-42 couldn't always provide any of that, but it still had people who needed something that fired. The improvisations weren't one single, siege pistol. They were a category. Single-shot zip gun-style weapons made from pipe and scrap. Cut-down flare pistols adapted to launch a real bullet. Workshop builds that borrowed triggers and springs from whatever was on hand. Some were chambered for small-caliber rounds because that's what could be scavenged -.22 or other light cartridges that looked unimpressive until you're 2 meters away in a dark stairwell. When one of these worked, it was a quiet equalizer. A courier or factory guard could at least threaten, sometimes kill, without a rifle slung on their back. When it failed brutally. Split chambers, ruptured cases, misfires from weak firing pins. The shooter didn't just lose a fight. He might lose fingers with it. Number 2. NKVD Internal Security Sidearms. Authority in a holster until the ammunition math caught up. Soviet doctrine treated sidearms as controlled instruments of command. Issue was centralized, recorded, and tied to role, especially for internal security. NKVD personnel were expected to carry reliable pistols or revolvers, with regulated maintenance and access to ammunition through state channels. The gun wasn't just for combat. It was for enforcement. Inside besieged Leningrad, that authority still mattered. A visible sidearm could move people at a checkpoint, force compliance during searches, or keep order in food lines that could turn ugly fast. The actual pistols varied: service TT-33s, Nagant revolvers, and sometimes non-standard weapons that entered the system through capture or confiscation. And unlike a random soldier, NKVD men were more likely to get holsters, spare parts, and at least some priority in supply. But priority wasn't immunity. When ammunition shipments were disrupted, even an official pistol could become a rationed tool loaded for duty, conserved at all other times. It could stop a looter at 10 steps. It could also mislead its owner into taking risks, assuming the next magazine would exist. In a siege, paperwork can't feed a firearm. Number 1. Depot-issued revolvers. The oldest guns stayed because they still answered one question. The system wanted modern pistols, standardized ammo, and predictable performance. Yet depots also held older revolvers, some pre-war stock, some long retained because they were durable and simple to store. In Leningrad's crisis, issuing from depot reserves meant rules got bent, not erased. The weapon was still logged, still assigned, still expected to be serviceable. That's why revolvers kept resurfacing. They tolerate neglect. They don't require magazines that can disappear. A worn revolver with a decent cylinder gap and a functional hand still fires if you can get cartridges. In a city where units were rebuilt, merged, and stripped for parts, that mattered more than elegance. You see the logic in how they were used: rear guards, plant security, Officers who needed a last-ditch tool when rifles were earmarked for the line. And they did work. A revolver could end a close-range assault or settle a confrontation without a drawn-out firefight. But age had a price. Timing drifted, springs weakened, reloads were slow under stress, especially with cold hands. Sometimes the gun fired when it mattered. Sometimes it clicked on an old, corroded round and that was the whole margin. Across the siege, the handgun wasn't a symbol. It was a negotiation between doctrine and hunger, between what the state could promise and what a person could actually carry. Every forgotten sidearm here is a receipt for scarcity and for the choices scarcity forces. If you want World War II history without simplification or mythology, subscribe to Brass and Blitz. We'll keep following the equipment where it actually went. Into hands, into street corners, into the gaps between orders and survival.